what Fidelia is passing around, hopefully, is the interdisciplinary journal of cybernetics and human knowing that I've been editing for 18 years now. So if you're interested in this area, you can look it up on the web. And much of what I'm going to talk about is also based on this book. You can see that you can look it up as a Google book and see most of it, and most of the models and figures I'm using here. But if you Google me, and I'm not dissatisfied with using Google, but there are secrets within it that's not solved. I think you would find my homepage, and there's a lot of free electronic papers for those interested in studying further on. But then, thank you for inviting me, Fidelia, and to Michael Buckland, who is not here, who's an old colleague of both Brier and me, and it was an inspiration of much of the work I've been doing here. So when somebody speaks to you, it would usually nice to know where they speak from. That although I have been 10 years at a library and information school or university, it actually is. I have another background, just like Brier, but another one. I'm from biology originally, so I started in that corner, studying mathematics and physics and chemistry, but most of my education was in the upper corner, studying living systems, physiology, ecology, genetics, and stuff like that. But I ended up specializing in animal behavior and brain science. So I was interested in the biological behavioral science called ethology, Konrad Lorenz and Nico Tinbergen, and the question of motivation and inner drive and meaning in their cognition and communication. So this nearly kicked me out of biology, because you should not ask those questions. They were too philosophical, and kicked me over on the other star here, because I went into psychology for about 3 or 4 years. I had studied some on the side, because I was interested again, how far could you take a natural scientific approach to the inner life and intentionality. And I was quite surprised how different the two views were. The vocabularies were completely different, and they knew hardly anything about each other. And from there I went into more philosophy of science subjects and tried to look for interdisciplinary frameworks, and it brought me to cybernetics many years ago, I think 25 years ago, and that's my association with the American Society of Cybernetics, which is also the home of second-order cybernetics, Heinz von Förster and Maturana and Varela's autopoiesis concepts, and things like that. And when I came to the business school later on, I was into the area of social philosophy and social science, and on the way of that I also discovered semiotics as another contribution to a possible interdisciplinary framework for these studies. So you could say now I'm speaking from the middle of the star. I will return to that later on, but that's kind of a short map of the interdisciplinary view that I'm trying to speak from, which has taken me about 30 years to develop in the book. So the research question I'm interested in is broader than only library and information science, because I kind of discovered that the same problem pops up both in biology and in library information science and linguistics and cognitive science, many ways. And right now I'm teaching at 4 different communication programs, and so it's been more and more interested to find out if there's any kind of theoretical framework that can understand these differences between computers and information processing and the animal perception, cognition, communication, as well as the level human subjective and social interpretation of meaning and language, and as far as I understood what Bruno was talking about. This is part of the problem. And so in short, is there something between information processing and neural and technological systems and the semiotic understanding of living systems? And as told you, it has relevance for many different areas. It's a huge area, and it's a very demanding area. I think at least one of my excuses of not having done what Brier wanted me to, develop it practically into some of the areas it's relevant for. I'm still hoping, and I do get approaches from researchers who then try to use the framework I've developed, and has only taken me 30 years so far. So I hope to get very, very old if I have to finish what Brier suggests. So there are all these different areas, data versus meaning, the physical perception versus signification, the science communication to common sense and machine translation, natural languages. I'm right now in a department with a lot of professors in different kind of languages are complaining about the deterioration of translation. Nobody wants to pay for it anymore. They hope the machines will do it. So this is a all-pervading question, not only for our area, but I think going through the whole technological problem, through the whole age of the idea of the information age. And maybe we are in the information age, but we are certainly not in the knowledge age so far. And can we come from the information age to the knowledge society? I'll say that in Denmark we're going the opposite way for the last 10 years. It's a deterioration instead of the respect for scientific and scholarly work. I think it's very severe, because the only way Denmark will survive is becoming more advanced in these areas. It's also, there's a major problem underneath here, the problem of causality, different kinds of causality, the efficient physical causality, idea of transfer of energy, and the formal, more informational pattern-based causality you find in computer technology, and the final or intentional causation that has a goal that we find in conscious linguistic beings. And we have difficulties how to relate those different kinds of causality to each other, and especially the third one is not real. The first one is very real, so we have problems defining reality also. Where I come from, the social reality is not as real as the material reality. And so that's another problem, the two culture problems. So I was brought up in the sciences, within science and technology, and a very important part of our belief in ontology is that no meaning in nature, no meaning in the material world. That's why we got out of religion and philosophy. We believe in information, maybe, objective information, fields, quantum fields, forces, stuff like that. Culture is a small part of nature, came rather late in cosmology, not very important, really. We have to learn a little of it to get around, but on the other hand, I'm now in the Department of Linguistics and Communication, where it's all meaning, it's all persuasion, power, understanding, and nature is an interesting concept in different languages that change over time. And maybe we can just think about global climate problems in another way, and change the discourse, and it will go away. Some of them even believes. And these two cultures have really difficulty speaking to each other. And it's not because of the persons only, it's because of the whole way that we put our scientific background and imported ontology and epistemology in the different ways we have defined those areas, which make it so difficult to cross them. So cybersemiotics is at least one attempt to point some of that out. And Norbert Wiener, I don't know why people always talk about Shannon, because Wiener was the one who connected the idea of information with thermodynamic entropy, and therefore created that whole cybernetic movement and defined information as net entropy and made it kind of positive concept in the sciences, something that is building up. Schrödinger used that in his little book, What is Life? It's very influential. Shannon had an entropy idea. For Shannon, entropy was information, so they had actually two opposite way of defining it, but he didn't have any ontology on his whole endeavor, I think. But this whole idea has been taken up by people like Ilya Prigozhin, talking about dissipative structures, self-organization, systems, emergence, putting information into being part of the scientific worldview, understanding how the world develops. And Bateson, that Brier also mentioned, try to develop such a non-technical, more wide-ranging concept of cybernetic information as a difference that makes a difference. His problem is, of course, how he defines mind and consciousness and meaning in a cybernetic framework. To Bateson, a mind is a system that operates on differences. Now some of the problems comes, I feared. We changed from PC to Mac. The system shall consist of closed loop or networks or pathway along which differences transformed to differences shall be transmitted. It shall be self-energized and self-corrective, have negative feedback and so on. All these are an important part of automation, of artificial intelligence, but there are hardly any qualia or meaning there. That's been my main quarrel with all my cybernetic friends. Kind of lead to what you could call the pan-computational philosophy, which is getting more and more hold of the whole philosophical and information science area now. The idea that along with energy and matter, information is becoming a basic term in our ontology. So information is the basic relational, structural pattern part of reality. We're talking about a pan-informational view combined often with a pan-computational ontology, believing that the world is like a computer and the human mind is like a computer. Great names like Gregory Chaiting has talked about that on the ECAP conferences. And my question is again, where's experience, qualia, emotion, free will? It's very difficult to represent those in these frameworks. And it's an argument alongside with Brier's about how the different paradigms are going to define our concept of information and knowledge. I followed for a while the work of Jerry Fodor, whose very interesting idea is that that the language I'm speaking to you is not the real language. You know, we just had a little problem with French and English. I only got about 1/10 of your lecture, I think. But that's just because we have these superficial differences in languages and culture. But underneath, these guys believe there is a language of thought, mentales, that is the same. It's more fundamental than the natural languages we speak. So sooner or later we'll get rid of them and all this problem with French and people don't understand English. Even worse, hvorfor forstår I ikke dansk? Det er fuldstændig urimeligt, at der er ingen, der taler dansk her. Nobody speaks Danish. And Hemslip was a Dane. You know him. So there's this hope, you know, there's a common informational foundation for the whole thing, for the languages, for consciousness, and we'll all live happily ever in the neural networks of the global brain in the information society. But again, how can you define awareness, meaning, consciousness in such a framework? If you describe the framework. Then you have the idea that different information systems process information the same way across humans, machines, animals, organizations. There's the whole idea of a very broad interdisciplinary information science, especially in our area. Vickery, two information specialists originating in chemistry, made such a wonderful book where they really fleshed out this paradigm very clearly. Conscious logical thinking is generally taken as a model for cognitive processes. Categories are important to break down thinking into small denotative linear choices. Perception is used categorical. Learning happening according to formal logical rules. Language is a system of formal mechanisms. There's only a cognitive subject. Even the subject and the world is produced, as John Archibald Wheeler calls it from bit. So we are produced from information, and consciousness is produced from information. There's an emphasis on the syntactical structural aspect in cognition. And you end up with these semantic networks that are very Saussurean because they are defined by themselves in an independent system as such. And you find those used a lot on the net these days. So I'm trying to paint a picture of the one major dominant paradigm that's really has all the money and all the technology these days. The problem is already viewed by Heinz von Förster, who developed what we now call second-order cybernetics, that if this is so, then I'm made by the same stuff that I'm defining out there. And so how is the relation between what I'm defining out there, because I'm made of the same thing, so how is this going to work? The ontology produced, even second-order cybernetics does not explain that very well, but it at least raises the problem, which John Archibald Wheeler also raises in this little good book by Hans Christian von Brier about the information society seen from a physical point of view, where he also says that if the physics we investigate in the world in the end come to define ourselves, but we are the prerequisite to define the physics with which we describe the world. So we have this bad circle of knowledge that feeds into itself and back to itself, and we have to find a way to get out of that Möbius tape there. So how is that possible at all? It seems to me that there are these two movements now, so we have this informational view coming from cybernetics and computer science now, moving up from the physical sciences up through chemical science, biological, psychological, social science, humanities. I just sketched that out here. And on the other hand, we have now a semiotic movement starting from humanities. You mentioned Saussurean semiotics here. I'm more fond of Persian semiotics because I think it's broader. It goes out into natural beings too. That's part of the biosemiotic movement, and that's moving down. And we kind of wave to each other as we pass by, each going different ways. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. I'm accepted now and then to speak to informational people. I'm the funny semiotic guy they listen to and go home and do something practical afterwards. So how are we going to deal with this observer in the loop of argumentation? The problem also that information always defined within the user's realm with a purpose of something. I say the tragic of library information science is that whenever a user enters a library, be it on the net or in physical, you actually want all the books to be classified according to your worldview and to your vocabulary in common sense, where you have no special knowledge, in specific words where you have specific knowledge, and you want it to be done like that. And instead you enter either a very strict language which is consistent and you don't understand, you have to learn and have to relate to the books. That takes you 3-5 years. I've tried to just teach with one database, Biosis. Or you get a very superficial mixed language like on the net where you seem to get a lot of things, but you have no idea what's happening underneath. So that's part of the strategy in there. But what develops out of cybernetics here is the idea, at least, that life has another organization, that it just has information flow through it. So here's one of Maturana's drawings. Brier is unfortunately dead, but I'm still in communication with Maturana. We are going to publish one of his papers soon. The idea that the nervous system is closed, it has a closed organization, and out here that's me, and the little flower there is Cybersemiotics, and I'm trying to get into your closed system. We say, what has that to do with me? It's too abstract. It has nothing to do with my practical way. I'm going to go away and keep my own autopoietic organization. The main point here is that there's no flow of information from me to you. I'm not able to press any kind of information into your consciousness, into your mind, because you determine what you will get out of what I'm telling you, and the prerequisites in your mind and interest and life world are determining what you will let get in and what you can understand and how you will perceive it. And if you pursue this and say, well, this cyberseminar is fairly interesting, let me read a bit more about it, and you may get some structural couplings to it. I'm sure you'll never understand it the way I understand it, for instance, but you may relate to it, and that's what they call the structural coupling. So you'll build some kind of idea of it. This is from Jakob von Uexküll, who's been used very much in biosemiotics, but he was actually very cybernetic in his idea, and he's talking about this object that's created in the cybernetic interaction with the object, not as it is in itself, but as it's construed in our world by our interaction with it, which is the problem with information. It get a new sense whenever it turns into a new system, be it personal interest, an organization, a specific use, or whatever. Niklas Luhmann, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy. I have many people in my university who hate him, even in social cybernetics. Yeah, now I'm cutting off a bit here. But anyway, he takes this autopoietic theory and generalizes it into 3 different systems, biological, a psychological, and a socio-communicative one. He wants to distinguish between these 3. I can still tell you that Maturana didn't like the idea, still do not like it. But anyway, I think it's very useful. So he distinguishes between the biological system and the psychological system and communication, which has the surprising fact that I'm not communicating with your psyche. I'm communicating with your communication, because your psyche is silent. I don't know what you're thinking. That's a problem of giving lectures, isn't it? You're thinking of all other sort of things, and I have no way. Maybe I'm lucky that I don't know what you're thinking of, but I have no admittance to what's going on inside you. You have a little admittance to what's going inside your body, but tell me right now, how is your liver doing? Do you have contact with your liver or your hypothalamus? Or your thymus? No. We think that we know our whole body, but actually we don't. We have contact with about 10% of it, or something like that. And it's a problem to get more and more contact. We are told to be more aware of our body. We have techniques to develop our sensibility towards our body and stuff like that. So they are closed systems towards each other. And Luhmann has this bon mot where he says that only communication communicates. So to him, the social is communication, and it's kind of determining what's going on in our world. So I try to make a figure this way. Oh, how did he come up here? Very interesting. So that's a way to say that the biological is the body, the head is the psychological, and the social communicative is in between. And those three systems interpenetrate in different ways, although they still remain fairly closed. So when my French is not so good, I mean, I'm partly outside the organization of your meaning field, isn't it? So, but there are, he says, two mediums of meaning, the psyche and the communicative system, and they operate in medium of meaning, not in the of information in itself. And what's interesting is it seems like that the field of meaning has another dynamic than that the field of information. And one of the problems is that we have difficulties representing the dynamics of meaning into the machine's dynamics of information and logic. And the meaning is much more than logic. And it seems that the ability to produce meaning is associated with being alive, having a body, an embodied mind as such. And so language is not an exchange of factual information. It's a field of meaning that arises through a dance where you try to convince each other of that there is some kind of reality. I'm trying to convince you that this problem is real, serious. You have to think this way that I think, and I'm trying to dance with you and try to convince you, knowing if I'm lucky I'll convince 2 or 3 of you, but I go away again because the dance was not deep and not long enough and we didn't speak enough. So what happens in this kind of system in cybernetic view is that you kind of get overruled by the whole language systems, which is also a tendency in structural sociology and semiotics, that the subjects disappear. They want the humans to go away, and so the source of willing and feeling, emotion, intentions are very problematic. One of the so I'm not very fond of taking social constructivism or radical constructivism too far, but one of my favorite constructivists is a professor in communication, actually, Klaus Krippendorf, who says that the task of constructivism is to describe a system's operation within its own domain of description and account for the constitution of its identity in the condition of its continued persistence in its own term. Constructivists need to find a way of putting the knower into a known that is so constructed so as to keep the knower viable in practice. Has to have some kind of reality into it. Many kinds of constructivisms ending in bad circles. One of my discussion partners told me, well, when I go into an airplane, I believe in the law of physics. And I asked this guy, what happened if you stop believing while you're in the air? And usually constructivists are not able to answer those kinds of questions. And that's a problem, I think. So again, where's the observer, consciousness, and subject? How did the brain come to have any kind of experience at all? I studied brain science for a couple of years and discovered that they are not going to give me the answer on that question. Many of my colleagues actually don't really recognize the question. that experience is something different, qualitatively different from the brain. I even believe that I'm different from my brain. I don't believe that it's my brain talking to you right now. On the other hand, I don't have a good theory of who is talking to you at the moment. That's another problem, isn't it? We need some kind of reflective theory of the observer if we want to make such a transdisciplinary idea of communication and cognition. And this what led me to Charles Sanders Peirce semiotics, which is also a phenomenological idea. So he's siding up with Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, even Hegel in some of this stuff. But he's developing a new kind of phenomenology, well, he called it phaneroscopy, and that might be a good thing to hold on to that new name because it's different from the rest, not least because it is evolutionary and it's transdisciplinary. So he tried to develop a theory of signification from there, going across humanity, social science, and natural sciences. There's a little problem with Peirce. He wrote about 100,000 pages, and they're not published, all of them, and I'm happy they're not. So it takes a couple of years to go really deep into what he's doing. But I want to introduce the phenomenological stance here. I think Merleau-Ponty has provocated very well with this statement because this was so difficult for me at least to understand coming from the sciences, that somebody would want to define what they were doing as more fundamental than the sciences, more fundamental than physics or cognitive science and information. And he says science has not and will never have by its nature the same significance qua a form of being as a world which we perceive for the simple reason that it is a rationale or explanation of that world. And I'm not a living creature, nor even a man, nor even a consciousness endowed with all the characteristics which zoology, social autonomy, or inductive psychology recognizes in these various products of the natural or historical process. I am the absolute source of my existence, does not stem from my antecedents, from my physical and social environment. Instead, it moves out towards them, sustains them, for I alone bring into being for myself the tradition which I elect to carry on. This is really a provocative statement towards all the sciences that wants to go back and define the human subject, the human being, that they have to start with phenomenology, and they're not able to incorporate phenomenology in their theory. They are on bad grounds. So it's an attempt to draw a map, because so far we don't have a common map. We have different maps, and we don't speak to each other. Those from another country, we don't speak to those. They speak French or something strange. So up here you have pragmatic semiotics, language philosophy, phenomenology, hermeneutics, which, again fought many years to be accepted as some kind of science. It's not good in English. German has Wissenschaft, which is broader. And on the other hand, you have here the behavioral analysis, physiology, the social sciences that are not very keen on the subject and intentionality. And if you make it more abstract, you will have the information sciences, cognitive science on this side, and you have the semiotics and phenomenology on the other side here, and that's why they don't speak so much to each other. And that's why I made this star here. One of the provocations here is also that I split biology from the natural sciences, and thinking that biology is something very different from the exact sciences also. We've had great problems also being accepted as a real science. We are the humanities of the sciences, but now we can produce genes and split them and stuff like that, so we're more accepted. So I think there are these 4 different ways of looking at the world, and I think our major problems are when you want to explain the whole thing from one of the points. So you get totalitarianism or reductionism when you try to look at everything from physics, or as the superstring theory of matter and forces and Big Bang and everything, or you want to see the whole world as a living system, or you want to see everything as an experience. You end up in solipsism or crude Marxism. Everything is a product of society and production, which you find also in many social science, social constructivist paradigms these days. So I think we are forced to consider all 4 if we want to move forward. That's not a nice idea, I know. It's complicated. I don't know exactly how to do it either. But it seems to me that we're stuck in the middle. We tried to work the corners. We tried to unite them. I mean, the grand materialistic informational stories trying to go from physics to biology to psychology to social science and made one grand narrative. In that aspect, I think I agree with postmodernity that this is too grand a narrative. I don't think it can work. We have to encompass the 4 aspects at the same time. We have to realize that they are each fundamental, but how we have a fundamental understanding of phenomenology and information at the same time. Well, I think that's what Peirce tried to do, but Peirce is very difficult to understand. I think I have known his work for 20 years or something. I'm trying to slowly getting there, but still layer upon layer. 2 minutes, that's not much. Some of us has developed a biosemiotics and try at least to transport semiotics into living beings and not describing them only as machines. And that's the whole idea, which I like very much, that logic presupposes semiotics. Semiotics is logic. The logic we know is only a formal aspect of logic. Logic has a very much broader foundation in Peirce's view. His idea of the sign are triadic. So there have to be 3 different things to produce semiosis. There has to be a sign, there has to be an object, and there has to be an interpretant, which is not you, but the experience inside of you of what the sign means. And many kind of systems would be able to produce such an interpretant. To make this little trick, and that's one of my great problems with colleagues, there are many who like this idea of the sign and use it, but they really don't like his 3 categories. Peirce was a great fan of Kant and studied him, and he made an architectural metaphysics like Kant, but he revised his basic categories. He also went into Hegel, because he's fairly close to Hegel with this evolutionary idea of development, but didn't like Hegel's dialectical categories either. His categories are a bit different, but it's an idea to try to go deeper than Kant, that there are 3 basic categories in every perception, every process of making something you see and hear or taste meaningful, being able to recognize it. Oh, this is that. Oh, this is sweet. This is red. This is high pitch. You need those 3 basic categories, or else it's actually a process philosophy. So he has these 3, firstness, secondness, and thirdness, that you cannot explain in a very short while. I think I'm getting close to, so I will try to round it up and say the basic thing with Peirce is that every thought is a sign. There's no direct introspection. you also get science when you look inside. That's also the idea of biosemiotics. You get science when you look outside. And so signs are very much what makes living system different from non-living systems, because they're able to produce science, interpret science, and computer do not interpret science. It doesn't have semiosis as such. And logic is developed from semiosis in Peirce. And they also want to transfer the idea of codes that's now connected to information science and computers into semiotics, that semiotics are actually working with codes. Codes has to function in some kind of living conscious systems to work. They're not laws of nature. I'll end up with just a hint of what kind of ontology this could create. An idea of a primary chaotic level of continuity, quality, potentiality, a bit like the quantum mechanical vacuum field, but now it has some living characteristics also. Then a level of matter, energy, and causality, a level of an informational level, and a semiotic level belonging to the living systems, and a level of conscious languaging using systems like human beings. So instead of putting information, energy, and matter down there, forces as the basic ontology, I want to develop a broader ontology within which signification is possible, and an evolutionary theory that you can understand how that's possible. And we're working on developing such a type of broad ontology. Yeah. Thank you.